I was halfway through my morning coffee when my phone buzzed. Brent Warner wants to see you. Now, no pleasantries, no explanation. Just a message from his assistant that snapped my pulse into overdrive. It was a Monday, gray and sluggish, the kind of day Austin's skyline seemed to disappear into its own haze. But inside Solentra Dynamics, things were boiling just beneath the surface. I could feel it the moment I stepped out of the elevator onto the executive floor. The tight smiles, the quick glances, the silence that felt manufactured. Brent's office door was already open, like he'd been waiting for me. He didn't look up as I entered, just gestured to the chair across from him and slid a red folder across his gleaming desk. "You're going to fix these numbers," he said, "or we're going to have a problem." Those 8 words hit harder than a punch to the gut. The folder in front of me held our Q3 financials. The real ones. They showed a 14% loss. Not because of incompetence, not because anyone had slacked off, but because that's what the truth looked like. Delayed contracts, turbine failures, and supply chain chaos had done their damage. But Brent didn't care about truth. He cared about optics. He cared about the $100 million deal with Vanguard Equity he had been chasing for months. Adjust the depreciation. Reclassify expenses. Spread the losses across next quarter. Make it work, he said like he was ordering lunch. I sat there, frozen, 1,000 thoughts crashing through my mind at once. I'd spent 7 years climbing through the ranks of this company. I believed in Solentra, in clean energy, in making the world a better place. But in that moment, Brent wasn't talking about saving the planet. He was asking me to burn down my integrity. "Ethan, you've got a future here," he added, a fake warmth curling around his words like smoke. "Don't throw it away over some accounting philosophy." Accounting philosophy? That's what he called it. My refusal to commit fraud. I left his office with my heart pounding in my chest and one cold truth reverberating through my spine. I was expendable, and he wasn't bluffing. What Brent didn't know, what he could never predict, was that I wasn't going to cave. Not because I was brave, not because I had some fantasy of being a whistleblower, but because I remembered what my father once told me. You can lose money, jobs, friends, but your name? Once that's gone, you don't get it back. That weekend, while Brent probably polished his pitch deck and ordered catering for his investor meeting, I was backing up every email, document, and voice message I could find. I encrypted everything, saved it in 3 places, and waited. Because when Monday came again, Brent thought he was going to destroy me. He had no idea I'd already built the bomb that would bring his empire down. The weekend passed in a blur of tension. I barely slept. I barely ate. The city outside my window went about its usual rhythm. Brunch crowds on South Congress, cyclists weaving through traffic, the muffled beat of a distant live band echoing into the night. But inside my apartment, time stood still. I sat on the floor surrounded by files, my laptop open, the glow casting deep shadows against the walls. Every document I uncovered, every email chain I reread, hardened my resolve. Brent hadn't just made a mistake. He had built a deliberate system, a house of cards dressed up as innovation and strategy. And now he expected me to hold the last card while he walked away with clean hands. I went through everything. Internal memos, spreadsheets marked confidential, Slack messages that made my stomach turn. And then there was the voicemail, his voice, casual and confident, telling his assistant to smooth the numbers before Vanguard gets spooked. That file alone was enough to unravel everything. By Sunday night, I had encrypted the entire set of evidence into 3 copies. One on a flash drive, one in a private cloud storage account, and one buried in a hidden folder on a separate laptop I rarely used. I didn't trust just one place. Not with something this explosive. Still, doubt crept in like a fog. What if I was overreacting? What if I went public and no one listened? Or worse, what if I was blacklisted, sued, silenced? But then I'd remember my dad's hands, callous from years of crawling through attics and under houses to fix broken AC units. He never cut corners. He never billed a customer for work he didn't do. And every time I asked him why he worked so hard, he'd just smile and say, because it's my name on the invoice. This was my invoice. Monday morning arrived gray and quiet, the kind of morning that looked like it had something to hide. I put on my best Navy suit, one I reserved for investor meetings and company galas. Today, it wasn't armor. It was strategy. I wanted to walk into Solintra like I belonged there because technically I still did. Brent's Porsche was already in the executive lot when I pulled in. I took my time walking up, breathing deeply, steadying myself for whatever was waiting. I could already sense it. There was no way he'd let this slide. When I reached my desk, Victoria, his assistant, was waiting. She didn't offer a hello, just said, "Mr. Warner wants to see you immediately." Her eyes didn't meet mine. The walk to his office felt longer than usual. Like every step was echoing louder than it should have. Colleagues glanced up from their cubicles, pretending not to notice, but their eyes lingered just a second too long. Brent was already sitting behind his desk when I walked in. Calm, composed. A folder with my name on it sat neatly in front of him. He gestured to the chair, and I sat without a word. "I hope you took the weekend to think about our conversation," he said, voice low and smooth. "We have a lot riding on this week." I looked him straight in the eye. "I did, and I'm not changing the numbers. I can't. It's fraud, Brent." He didn't flinch, just opened a folder and slid a paper across the desk. It was a termination letter, predated for today. The reason? Inability to align with strategic direction. The words blurred for a second as the heat rose in my chest. This is what happens when someone refuses to lie. I said, my voice controlled but heavy. Brent leaned back in his chair, folding his hands behind his head. This is what happens when someone refuses to be a team player. Maybe you'd be better off in a place that doesn't require vision. I stared at him, not as a boss, not as a CFO, but as a man desperate to save his own skin, willing to sacrifice anyone who wouldn't play along. It wasn't anger I felt. It was clarity. He had already lost. I signed the document. He smirked, thinking it was over. But I walked out of that office not defeated, but focused. Victoria followed me to my cubicle with a clipboard in hand, ready to monitor me as I packed. The ritual was humiliating, like I was some thief. But I stayed calm, every movement deliberate. I placed my framed photo of my dad into the box last. Then, just before Victoria could notice, I slipped something else into my pocket, a card from a reporter I'd met at an energy finance conference. Madison Lane, Austin Ledger. She'd told me, "If anything shady ever happens where you work, call me first." This wasn't just shady. It was radioactive. As I walked to the elevator with my box, past the glass conference room, where Brent would soon pitch his doctor numbers to Vanguard, I knew one thing for sure. The story he thought was buried? It was about to make the front page. The sun was just beginning to rise over Austin when I sat down at my small kitchen table, the box from my office still unopened beside me. The silence in the apartment was loud, too loud, and every tick of the wall clock felt like a countdown. Not to something terrible anymore, but something inevitable. My phone sat on the table, dark and still, but I didn't need it to ring to know what I had to do. I took out the business card I had hidden in my pocket, the one with the clean, serif letters. Madison Lane, Senior Investigative Reporter, The Austin Ledger. Her words from that energy finance conference 6 months ago echoed in my mind. If you ever see something no one else is willing to talk about, bring it to me. I'll make sure it's heard. I didn't hesitate. I dialed her number. Lane, a voice answered after 2 rings. Crisp, awake, professional. Hi, Madison. This is Ethan Ramirez. We met at the Green Tech Summit earlier this year. You interviewed me about Solintra Dynamics and their growth in the renewable sector. There was a beat of silence. I remember. You were the one who wouldn't let me simplify the explanation of tax incentives for solar retrofits. I chuckled softly. Guilty. Her tone sharpened. What's going on, Ethan? I've got a story. One that involves investor fraud, falsified financial reports, and a CFO who fired me yesterday because I refused to help him commit it. Now the silence on the line was different, weighted, alert. Are you willing to go on the record? Yes, but not yet. I want to make sure this story is bulletproof. I have documentation, emails, spreadsheets, internal memos. A voicemail too, but it has to be airtight. You're not just talking to a journalist anymore, Ethan. You're opening a door that's going to be impossible to close once we walk through it. I know, I said quietly, but someone has to open it. There was a pause. Then, Can you meet me this morning? 8 a.m. at Blue Seed Coffee on 5th and Lamar. It's quiet, no cameras, and I'll bring a recorder. I'll be there. By 7:45 a.m., I was seated in a corner booth with a manila folder full of evidence and a knot in my stomach. Madison walked in right on time, dressed in black jeans, a simple blazer, and that same no-nonsense attitude I remembered from the conference. She sat down, took out a digital recorder, and with my permission, set it on the table between us. For 2 hours, I walked her through everything. The meeting with Brent, his demands, the manipulation tactics, determination. I handed over documents as I spoke, watching her eyes scan through the figures and flagged emails. Then came a voicemail. She played it twice. Brent's voice was unmistakable, smooth, calm, dangerous. Reclassify, Q3 losses. Make them look like investment stage burn. Vanguard doesn't need to see red ink this close to the vote. Madison leaned back in her chair, face unreadable. This isn't just a story, she said finally. This is a takedown. Solentra is built on a lie, I said. If Vanguard signs that check, it's fraud on a scale no one's ready for. She nodded. I'll need a few hours to verify everything, but you've given me enough to start writing. Once this is published, it's going to go fast. Have you spoken to the SEC? Not yet, I admitted. I was waiting to see what your reaction would be first. Madison didn't scold me. She just reached into her bag and handed me a slip of paper. You're going to. Today. Here's a contact. Agent Christine Holden. She's at the SEC's Dallas office, runs their financial crimes unit. She'll take this seriously. By the time I got back to my apartment, my decision was already made. I sat down at my desk, took a deep breath, and opened the SEC's whistleblower portal. I uploaded the encrypted files one by one, carefully labeling each entry. Then I typed a full report, factual, direct, no emotion, just evidence. I didn't need emotion. The numbers spoke for themselves. Before I hit submit, I paused. This was the point of no return. Then I remembered the looks on my co-workers' faces as I was escorted out of the office. Some confused, some indifferent, but one, my colleague Deshaun, had looked straight at me with something between guilt and helplessness. He knew, or at least he suspected, and maybe he didn't have the courage to speak up yet. But I did, and that had to be enough. I hit submit. It was done. The acknowledgement page blinked back at me. Thank you. Your submission has been received. An investigator will contact you within 72 hours. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling for the first time all day. My apartment was still quiet. The world hadn't exploded. Yet, but it would. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I barely slept. My body would lie still, but my mind kept running. What if Brent found out what I'd done before the article dropped? What if the SEC dismissed my report as too thin, too late, or worse, flagged me as a disgruntled former employee trying to retaliate? What if no one believed me? But fear wasn't enough to stop me anymore. Not after everything Brent had tried to bury. Not after he tossed away 6 years of my work like it was a spreadsheet error. At exactly 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning, my phone buzzed. The Austin Ledger had gone live with Madison's story. Whistleblower accuses Solentra CFO of $100 million investor fraud. I clicked the link, my heart racing. The article was long, detailed, devastating. Madison had written it like a scalpel, precise and sharp. She quoted internal emails, laid out the timeline of financial manipulation, and most damning of all, embedded the audio file of Brent's voicemail. The story didn't just expose Brent Warner. It put Solentra Dynamics in the crosshairs of every regulator, investor, and journalist in the country. I barely had time to absorb it before the messages started pouring in. 17 missed calls, dozens of texts, LinkedIn requests from reporters, old classmates, even former professors. My inbox looked like a bomb had gone off. But one call made me freeze when I saw the number. Washington, D.C., 202, area code. I answered. Mr. Ramirez, this is Agent Christine Holden with the SEC. I'm calling about your whistleblower report. Her voice was calm, direct, but it carried the weight of authority. I sat up straight. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for calling. We've reviewed your evidence, and we're opening a formal investigation into Solentra Dynamics and Brent Warner. Based on what you've submitted and the article published this morning, we're coordinating with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division out of Dallas. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. A federal investigation. The kind that knocks on doors, freezes assets, and makes headlines. We'll be executing a search warrant at Solentra this morning, she continued. I wanted to give you advance notice. There's going to be substantial media attention. Are you prepared for that? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. I moved to the window. Down on the street, 3 news vans were pulling up. Cameras, microphones, reporters stepping out, already scanning the building. They're here, I whispered. I suggest you stay inside, Agent Holden said. We'll be in touch later today to schedule a formal interview. Your cooperation is appreciated, Mr. Ramirez. By 9 a.m., every local station in Austin was airing the same footage. Federal agents entering Solentra's headquarters, staff being escorted out of the building, computer equipment loaded into unmarked vans. Brent's face appeared briefly on one camera, pale, tight-jawed, flanked by agents. No cuffs yet, but he wasn't walking free either. Watching it from my living room felt surreal. That office, those halls, I had walked them 100 times. And now they were the scene of a corporate crime investigation. It was the downfall Brent never saw coming. By noon, Vanguard Equity had released a public statement. In light of emerging allegations, Vanguard Equity is suspending all negotiations with Solentra Dynamics effective immediately. We remain committed to ethical business partnerships and transparency in financial reporting. It was over. Brent's carefully manufactured illusion, his legacy, his network, his fake numbers, had collapsed in less than 48 hours. And yet, the fallout was just beginning. I received a message from Deshawn, one of the junior analysts on my old team. Ethan, I saw everything. Thank you. I always knew something wasn't right with those projections. I didn't have the guts to ask questions. You did. You're a damn hero, man. I stared at his words for a long time. Hero. I didn't feel like one. I felt tired, burned out, alone. But I also felt proud. Not because Brent got caught, but because I didn't let him drag me down with him. Because I remember my father's voice. You don't sell your name, me, Joe. You protect it. The next few days were a blur of interviews, legal briefings, and calls for firms offering me jobs or asking if I wanted to consult on ethics audits. Some of them were the same firms that had once ghosted me when I applied right out of grad school. Funny how the story changes when you have a little national exposure. But I wasn't thinking about new jobs yet. I was thinking about the people still inside companies like Solentra. Honest people, scared people, good people. I didn't burn down the building. I just refused to hold a match. And in doing so, maybe I gave someone else the courage to do the same when their moment came. The days that followed felt like stepping into a new life. One where every headline seemed to have my name hiding between the lines. Even when it didn't, I could feel it there behind phrases like whistleblower report, fraud exposure, or ethical stand shakes green tech giant. My apartment, once a quiet haven with bare walls and the hum of ceiling fans, now buzzed constantly. Phones ringing, emails stacking up, interviews scheduled. A week ago, no one outside Solentra Dynamics knew my name. Now I was being asked to appear on national morning shows, business panels, and finance podcasts. One anchor even called me the conscience of corporate America. But behind all the headlines, I was still just Ethan Ramirez, a guy who had refused to be part of a lie and had the receipts to prove it. That didn't mean the road ahead was easy. The first major consequence came from Solentra itself. Their legal team sent a carefully worded letter accusing me of breaching my NDA, of defamation through unauthorized disclosure of internal data, and reckless public commentary. It was all noise, intimidation, but it still shook me. I sent the letter to Madison, who looped in a First Amendment lawyer she trusted. He looked it over and laughed. If they want a war in court, he said, they picked the wrong side of truth. I wasn't afraid of lawsuits. I was afraid of silence. Afraid that once the news cycle moved on, Brent would find some way to slither back into another boardroom, another startup, another growth story. So I stayed loud. Every interview I gave wasn't about me. It was about what I had seen. How easy it was to build a lie when no one asked questions. How companies use fear to silence their employees. How financial creativity can become a polite term for organized deceit. But between the phone calls and press requests, life started to feel hollow. I had no job, no routine, no identity tied to a business card or company title anymore. For the first time in years, I had to ask myself, who am I when I'm not helping build someone else's dream? One quiet Thursday morning, I found myself at the edge of Lady Bird Lake, watching the fog roll over the water. Austin was waking up, but I felt still like I had stepped outside of time. I sat on a bench with a coffee in one hand and a worn notebook in the other. I hadn't written in years, not really, but that morning I opened to the first page and scribbled 3 words. Build with honesty. It struck me that I'd spent a decade working to climb the corporate ladder, only to find out the ladder was leaning against a rotten wall. But maybe I could build something better. Maybe others like me, people who refused to cut corners or fake numbers, needed a space to grow without compromise. Over the next few weeks, that idea took shape. I started reaching out to contacts, former coworkers, ethics officers, data analysts, anyone who had ever confided in me about feeling uneasy with company practices. And the stories came pouring in. People from healthcare firms, logistics, education tech. All of them had seen something, but most stayed silent. Not because they lacked courage, but because they lacked support. That's when I decided to create something new. Not just a business, but a platform. A place where ethical professionals in finance, compliance, and operations could work on real, transparent projects. Where companies had to sign integrity pledges and financial records weren't dressed up like stage props. I called it Clear Ledger. It started with just a few of us, meeting weekly in co-working spaces, trading ideas and frustrations. But within 2 months, we had a functioning pilot, consulting on financial reporting for small renewable startups who needed help staying compliant without being corrupted. And then something beautiful happened. A nonprofit in San Diego reached out, then a mid-sized solar energy firm in Oregon. And just like that, we were doing the thing Brent said was impossible, growing a business without lying. Was it slower? Yes. Was it harder? Absolutely. But it was real. There were still hard days, especially when I'd see Brent's name pop up in court updates. He was fighting back, of course, trying to spin the narrative, blaming subordinates, denying knowledge. But the recordings, the memos, and the emails didn't lie. And neither did the dozens of employees who came forward after my story broke. They'd seen what I saw. They just needed someone to go first. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't at the start of all this. Doing the right thing won't always make you popular. It might not make you rich, and it certainly won't protect you from sleepless nights or tough choices. But it gives you something more valuable than applause or promotions. It gives you peace. The kind of peace that lets you sit across from your reflection at the end of the day and say, I didn't sell my name to keep a title. I didn't become the lie just to survive inside it. I walked away from Solentra with nothing but a box of personal items and my name. But that name was still clean. And that, I've learned, is the foundation of everything worth building. 6 months had passed since the morning federal agents walked through Solentra's glass doors and pulled the curtain back on a stage Brent Warner thought he could control forever. 6 months since my phone wouldn't stop ringing with reporters, lawyers, and former colleagues who wanted to say everything they were too afraid to say when the lights were still off. 6 months since I stepped into the biggest unknown of my life, with no job, no office, no steady paycheck. Just the truth and a name I refused to tarnish. But in those 6 months, something unexpected happened. The chaos subsided. The spotlight dimmed. And in the quiet that followed, I began to see my future more clearly than I ever had before. Clear Ledger, the ethical finance collective I'd started with nothing but a notebook and an idea, had slowly taken root. It wasn't flashy. We didn't have venture capital or a gleaming high-rise office. We had folding chairs in a shared workspace and clients who were just trying to do business the right way. And yet it was real. We helped a wind turbine company restructure their reporting process to meet federal guidelines without cutting corners. We audited a solar firm in Arizona that had been burned by predatory investors and helped them recover. We even hosted a small virtual summit, bringing together compliance professionals, journalists, and whistleblowers across industries to talk about the intersection of ethics, leadership, and transparency. One day, I got a call from a professor at UT Austin who had followed my story. She invited me to guest lecture her class on corporate governance. I almost said no. I didn't see myself as a speaker or role model, but she insisted. So, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, I stood in front of a room full of students, most of them just a few years younger than I'd been when I walked into my first accounting job. I told them the story, everything. From the moment Brent handed me that red folder to the day I watched him walk out in handcuffs. I told them about fear, about reputation, about the weight of choosing silence or action. When I finished, no one said a word for several seconds. Then a student in the back raised her hand. "How did you know you were doing the right thing?" she asked. I paused, thinking. I didn't, I said. Not at first. I was scared. I doubted myself every step of the way. But I had to ask one question. What would happen if I did nothing? And the answer scared me more than Brent ever could. That moment stayed with me long after I left campus. Because the truth is, we don't always recognize courage in real time. Sometimes it doesn't look like a big speech or a dramatic scene in a boardroom. Sometimes it's just the quiet choice to say no when it would be easier to say nothing. Sometimes it's backing up files at midnight, knowing you might lose your job for doing it. Sometimes it's signing your name on a whistleblower report, knowing it might burn bridges you spent years building. But integrity isn't about comfort. It's about character. One night, as I sat on my balcony watching the Austin skyline blink against the stars, I thought about my father again. He had passed away the year before everything happened. He never got to see the fallout, the redemption, or the interviews. But he would have understood, because to him, reputation was sacred. He used to say, "People can take your job, your title, your paycheck. But your name? They only take it if you hand it to them." Brent Warner had offered me a faster way up the ladder, padded with falsified numbers and strategic lies. And for a moment, just one moment, I had stared at that offer and thought, maybe this is how the game is played. But I had walked away, not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I couldn't stomach being a coward. And now, every time a young professional emails me after reading the Ledger article, asking, how do I speak up without losing everything? I tell them what no one told me. You don't lose everything when you speak up. You find out what you really have. Real friends, real strength, real clarity, and most importantly, a clean name. A name you can still stand behind when the world stops clapping. A name you can pass on without shame. So no, I don't miss Elentra. I don't miss the corner office dreams, or the catered meetings, or the fake smiles and investor decks. I found something better. I found my voice. I found my purpose. I found out that even in a world where lies are polished and sold as strategy, the truth still has power. And when you choose it, even when it costs you everything, you haven't lost. You've just begun again, with nothing to hide and everything to build. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between what's easy and what's right? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone. Like this video if you believe integrity still matters. Subscribe for more powerful real-life stories about courage, truth, and the people who risk everything to do what's right. Remember, in a world full of shortcuts, your name is the one thing you never sell.